Welcome to Left, East to West with me, Nikki Hill.
And me, Tom Parkin. Lots going on. We're going to touch on a few things. A leading Alberta separatist who has been working with Trump, a brewing BC boycott of Pattison Group companies after word that one of the company's warehouses might get sold to ICE. And Nikki?
And we're going to have a feature interview with Karl Belanger, a well-known Quebec and federal politics analyst who's going to help us understand the rise and fall of Francois Legault, who announced his resignation in mid-January.
Okay, so this interview is going to be really helpful for understanding what's driving Quebec politics, where there's an election this fall, and the PQ is miles ahead, and the CAQ is in the gutter. So there'll be some talk about the referendum that we're looking at. But before we get to Karl,
we're going to do Below the Fold as a check-in on a couple of issues.
Let's do that.
Okay. First, probably everyone saw the story late last week that a leader of the Alberta Separatist campaign, Jeff Rath, had an ongoing meetings with officials in the Trump administration. Premier David Eby condemned Rath using the word treason, but Alberta Premier Danielle Smith refused to condemn Rath for plotting with MAGA officials. Tom, what's our background here?
Yeah, okay. Well, since 2021, Alberta's had this Citizen Initiative Act. It's a law that can require a question be put to a vote, a popular referendum, if at least 20% of the people on the Alberta's voter lists and 20% in 2/3 of the ridings sign a petition asking for that question. That was the law in 2021. And along came Jeff Rath, the guy who we've been reading about going down to visit Mr. Trump's cronies. And he's saying, well, we could use this law to force a citizen vote on separatism. And just to help him along, people might remember that in spring of 2025, around this time last spring, Danielle Smith's UCP passed a bill to lower the threshold. Instead of being 20% of the people on the voting list, she made it just 10% of the people who actually cast a ballot, 10% of those cast ballot, not 20% of those who were eligible to ballot. So that dropped the number required for this petition from about 500, maybe 570 or 600,000 signatures required to about 177. So this is the first time Smith helps Rath get this separatism thing on the agenda. So Rath goes ahead, he files his application under the Citizen Initiative Act to have her separatism question put and set the clock so that he can start collecting the signatures and bring them back. And if he has the 177, then it triggers a vote. But in August, a court, which was reviewing the question that he wanted to have asked, said, no, you can't ask a question on separatism. That's not within the scope of the Citizens Initiative Act. That wasn't what it was created to do. Well, guess what? In December of this year, Danielle Smith rides to Mr. Rath's help again, passing Bill 14, putting this in scope of the Citizen Initiative Act, and passing that bill, allowing it to happen in just 10 days. Nikki, government can do things fast when it wants to. That's the lesson.
We've seen that, yeah.
Yeah. So Rath and his APP, the Alberta Prosperity Project, resubmit their application, and on January 2nd, Elections Alberta announced it had approved the question, and Rath has now until May the 2nd to collect his 177,000 names. Thank you very much, Danielle Smith. And what we learned last week was, of course, that Rath has been meeting with Trump officials starting last April, sharing information, and seeking a $500 billion financial backstop for Alberta. And remember, this is coming news as we have a new national security strategy in the United States that very overtly says that the Trump administration will help movements in other countries that are aligned with its agenda. And its agenda, well, we all saw the picture of the Western Hemisphere with the American flag draped over Venezuela, Greenland, and Canada. So, and we also may have noticed that 2 weeks ago, Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent was talking about the APP's, Mr. Rath's referendum. He called Alberta a natural partner for the United States. So, there is a massive hole here. There's a huge threat of foreign interference, overt covert
Mhm.
foreign interference in this Alberta referendum. And we don't know anything really about Rath's APP. Like, if you go to their website, it doesn't say who the board is. It certainly doesn't say where their money comes from. And just in the as part of that, people might know Wesley Wark. He served in the Prime Minister of Canada's Advisory Council on National Security for Chrétien, for Martin, for Harper. And a couple of weeks ago, he, in a written affidavit, warned that neither Alberta or Ottawa has taken any real steps to monitor or prevent foreign support for Rath's campaign to gather petition names. Um, Nikki, I do not expect that Pierre Poilievre will ever push Prime Minister Carney to toughen rules on foreign interference when it comes to Donald
Mhm.
Trump. I think that job falls to the New Democrats,
Mhm.
and they're the only folks who are going to do that. So I just wonder, Nikki, could Don Davies and the leadership contestants do themselves and Canada a real favor here by giving, and maybe frankly giving Mr. Carney a favor by giving him the push and creating the space by tabling some amendments to toughen laws to make sure that whatever happens with this referendum, it isn't a big case of foreign intervention in Canadian politics.
It's interesting, I think, too, with the first ministers coming out of premiers meetings in Ottawa too, where I feel like some of the biggest bumps in coming out of that are both premiers David Eby and Wab Kinew in their responses to some of these issues, and their strength in it. So it's always good to see New Democrats show up on the Hill, but those two, I think, made a pretty big splash in clarity on these issues around treason and
They
involvement from
did.
the states.
They did, and I also really liked Wobb's comment, he did a short video last week, saying, I try and run a fiscally, a tight ship and make sure that money is well spent for the taxpayer, for the people of Manitoba, but I'm not gonna check in my pockets to see how many nickels and dimes I have, or dollars before I condemn what ICE is doing in my neighbor state. I think that to me, that was a touching and telling moment.
Yeah,
Speaking
good
of
point.
ice,
Speaking of
speaking of
ice, I
ice,
feel like we're talking about ice a lot.
yeah, last week you were talking about ice, and you were talking
Was.
about backlash to a Vancouver-based tech company, Hootsuite, as details about a contract with ICE came to light. And then since then, we've seen a lot of pressure on the Jimmy Pattison group on another type of deal with ICE. Uh,
Mhm.
what's the story on this one, and what's the latest?
It's
What does this
been
mean for businesses?
Yeah, I think that's the important part here, and I think Hootsuite's finding itself with I certainly keep seeing on social media protests popping up at Hootsuite, which is and it looks like on that front, where I tried to heave it last week at the end of the show, it's still, they're digging in, I think, on their ICE contract. But on the flip side, Jim Pattison Group was in the news with reports that they were looking at a potential sale of a Virginia warehouse that they own through it's a pretty large conglomerate of companies based here in BC, but with for Homeland Security for use as an ice processing facility. So pretty quickly, and this is actually the thing that's remarkable, and I think that people should be watching is how quickly this Canadians, British Columbians reacted to even just this report and how fast that backlash was. I think Pattison kind of struggled here to figure out what their response was. So Jim Pattison is one of BC's best known business people for people who don't know, but also he's one of Canada's wealthiest people. So he's got a reported $16 billion empire. One of those companies, just one, owns that Hanover warehouse that was in question here. And I think, they started coming out saying, in the face of a boycott, of course, boycotts can only impact things where people have the ability to shift their purchasing. So they're not really shifting their purchasing with the development company, but they were looking at shifting it with Save On, which is, grocery retail with advertising space, which Pattison owns a lot of. So places where you can quickly go and hit and damage a company. And so they were, coming out and saying that this was just, they're not their Pattison food groups were not involved with their development groups, just really trying to clarify who is involved. And I think not doing a great job of it because I was still seeing a lot of press here. Saw, friends and companies like Point Blank Creative coming out and stating good on them that they wouldn't be spending clients' advertising money in Pattison Group. And I think really importantly, UFCW 1518, because when we think of boycotts, we do think about the impact on people working
Jobs.
in those businesses.
Mhm.
and UCW 1518 represents the grocery and retail workers in a lot of these the Pattison Group retail stores. So unionized workplaces here came out really strong from the union, from workers saying they were opposed to this. Good on them. I'm actually a member of that union's professional division, so did it proud. But what's come out now is that they're saying the sale's not going to go through. So this is where the response actually is interesting for me. It's how companies in Canada are going to handle this heightened concern from Canadians about what is happening and what ICE means below the border. But of course, like, we do have very close borders here. I'm about half an
Yeah.
hour from from American border myself. So it was such a fast paced boycott backlash going on here. I was, talking to stakeholders this week who are even thinking carefully right now about whether they take sponsorships from local but American owned, local based companies for charitable activities because they don't want to be associated with those companies or seen to be supporting ICE or facilitating any of these raids or activities from what they're seeing. And I think like that shows us how much this is being paid attention to by Canadians, how deep it's running here. And I think, businesses need to be paying attention right now, in particular to this Pattison issue and how quickly it spread.
Yeah.
BC's Attorney General this week actually cautioned businesses and who may be looking at other deals with ICE in
All
their
right.
functioning. So this is getting pretty big. And as a business owner, I would say people need to be really cognizant right now of how the public is feeling because as Canadians, British Columbians, we can, watch the news, but only control so much. But boycotts are things we can definitely control.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, when you when you watch basically the interior army in your next door neighbor murder people on the streets and get away with it, it's just I mean, people like that's just so visceral.
Hmm. Yeah.
People have an immediate effect, and we saw that here in Ontario last week when um, there's a company in London that's building builds they're like uh, personnel carriers, right? And they got a contract with ICE. And at the time when they got the contract, Doug Ford was like, "Oh, this is fantastic," right? And a lot of people were like, "Fantastic? What are you talking about? These guys, this is like, uh, you know."
Yeah.
And of course, then the media gets back and says, "You really? Do you want to go on the record saying this is fantastic again?" And he's like, "Oh, no, I don't. I don't even know who this company
Yeah.
is." Basically,
Hard
right?
pivot.
Yeah, I don't know her, I think was, Doug's
Yeah.
answer. It's a very deeply felt, visceral thing when you see those videos. And,
Yeah.
yeah, brand management, is the technical way, I guess, but maybe it's just trying to be a little bit human. Anyway,
Well,
well,
exactly.
we
And
got our interview.
Canadian.
Yeah, we got our interview with Carl, and,
Mhm.
coming up next.
With several polls showing his coalition for the future of Quebec would not win a single seat if an election was held right now, on January 14th, Premier Francois Legault called it quits. Legault had a remarkable political history, creating the CAQ, leading it back to back majority governments, and even more remarkable because his CAQ may well disintegrate back into nothingness, maybe just a footnote in Quebec political history.
Mm. So with us is Karl Belanger, a well-known Quebec and federal political analyst, the president of Traction Strategies, and he's going to help us understand the rise and fall of Francois Legault. Welcome to Left, East, and West, Carl. Thank you very much.
Well, thanks for having me.
It's terrific. Carl, Francois Legault is known as the leader of the CAQ and the premier of Quebec since 2018. But his political history goes back quite a lot further. So, and not with the CAQ, with the Parti Québécois. So, give us a little bit of the political history, the ancient history of Francois Legault before the formation of the CAQ.
Well, the first thing to understand with Francois Legault is that he's a businessman first and foremost. He started with Ernest and Young. He was a controller, and then he moved into the aviation sector. He was part of Nationair. He was part of Quebec Air, and then in the late '80s, he founded the Air Transat, which is probably the biggest charter airline for for vacation from Canada. So he's been around for quite some time in the Quebec Inc. portrait here in Quebec. And then he was recruited by Lucien Bouchard in the late 90s to join the PQ government, and he became a minister in the Bouchard government. He was notably, he held industry, he held science and technology, and then eventually became Minister of Education and later Minister of Health. So that was his contribution to public service as a minister. Then he spent 5 more years as an opposition MNA before resigning and going back to private life. But that didn't stay long, because a few years after, 2 years in fact, he created this thinking movement, this thought movement that morphed into a political party and merged with the Action démocratique du Québec, the ADQ, which was led by Mario Dumont at some point, and knocked on the doors of government before falling back to a distant third in the Quebec election. And on the ashes of the ADQ and his own movement, they created Coalition Avenir Québec in 2011.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and then so in 2011, and Karl, Legault comes from a PQ background, but he's a business person, and you usually think of PQ as being kind of a social democratic and Labor Party, or it certainly has been at times, but it began, I suppose, to take on a little bit of a different complexion, political orientation during this period with Lucien Bouchard.
Yeah, I mean, Lucien Bouchard was a conservative minister, right? He was a Brian Mulroney minister. And when he joined the PQ, there was a definite shift to the right by the Parti Québécois government. They had this objective of zero deficit. There was severe cuts in public services in Quebec, and it became, not as social democrats as it was certainly under Lévesque or even under Parizeau or Landry. It became more, they had a shift to the right for sure, and Legault was part of that shift, more business oriented, which also was part of Lucien Bouchard's thinking, which was, in order to create the winning conditions for Quebec, you had to get closer to the business community. You had to get businesses on side with you if you were to have the project go forward and eventually win.
Mm. Yeah, and then in 2011, he teams up with Charles Sirois, who's I guess had got a history of being a liberal, but he wasn't an MNA or anything of that sort, right?
No,
and now
he
he's
was
become
more
a
of a
billionaire.
lobbyist type.
Yes, and he's become a billionaire, and they formed the CAQ in 2012, and there's elections later that year, and they do okay, and it ends up being a Pauline Marois minority for a couple of years. So how did they navigate that situation?
So François Legault, by creating this party, obviously the goal was to form government, but they wanted to really offer a third way, a third way in Quebec, something that was outside of the paradigm of federalist versus separatist, which had been the case since 1970, and so the goal was to try to move the debate beyond that constitutional issue and focus on the economy. As a businessman, it was his main focus. And then they described themselves as autonomist. So neither separatist or federalist, but for Quebec within Canada, but a stronger Quebec than the Liberals. So they were trying to fit in between. And it took a while for people to buy into that vision.
And so, of course, we get into 2011 as well, though. And I'm always fascinated when we're talking about political parties growing and forming, and then the context of a movement swelling. And I think, we can go back into 2011, and you and I certainly had some very active roles in lead up to that. But, in 2011, we saw that year in the federal elections with the Canada's NDP and Jack Layton sweeping Quebec. Is there a connection here as they saw this movement building going on?
Well, there is one in the sense that people in Quebec were looking for alternatives that were not traditional.
Right.
And they were looking for different ways to express themselves. And so the ADQ, the Action démocratique, the predecessor to the Coalition Avenir Québec, was part of that kind of movement of Quebecers who were kind of getting tired and fed up with, blue-red debate. And at the federal scene, it was kind of the same, with the Bloc being kind of the equivalent of the PQ on the federal level, but not really offering anything new. So people were looking for something different, and part of the reasons for that was the different fundraising scandals that hit Quebec, the corruption within the Liberal
Right.
Party, but that affected other parties as well, the PQ and at the federal level. You can remember the sponsorship scandal and the aftermath.
Yeah.
So the voters were moving beyond their traditional political views. They were moving beyond that. Gone are the day where the aunt of great-great-grandfather came out of the grave and voted red or voted blue because that's not what we always did in this family. Everything became more fluid and less entrenched, and it created conditions for waves, such as we saw federally with the NEP and later with Francois Legault provincially.
And there's
Yeah, it's
also
interesting.
there's also a culture war going on, I think it's fair to say. Uh, but you can explain this to us. It's going on in Quebec politics at the same time. How did the three parties, the PQ, the Liberals, CAQ, how did they navigate that period of the talk about I guess it would be the idea of the secularization of Quebec and how exactly that played out and the nuance and the hypocrisy sometimes of it. So where did Legault lead through that mess?
Well, it's funny because the rise of the ADQ that I referred to, the party that was led by Mario Dumont himself, a former young liberal, uh, really made secularism and what they called accommodation raisonnable back in the 90s. They really made it their forte, and it all goes back to the first wave of immigration, mostly from Arabic countries in the aftermath of the wars that were happening down there, and there was a reaction, especially in rural Quebec, to the religious accommodation that they were asking for, and so it created the conditions that the political parties realized that there was a market for that kind of rhetoric, a market to go after these exception. And you have to understand in the bigger context in Quebec that there was the Catholic Church had a huge influence over Quebec politics for a number of years, well, decades. Um, to the point where former Premier Maurice Duplessis was campaigning, saying, he was the leader of the Union Nationale. Their color was blue, and says paradise is blue, and hell is red. Reds were the liberals. So the church was basically on side with that, and they had a lot of influence. And then there was a huge break in the 60s with La Révolution Tranquille. And so the idea of the church going back and having, or religion having any kind of influence on the public life, slowly but surely grew as something of an antithesis in Quebec. And there was a visceral reaction. But of course, that reaction was even more visceral uh, when it was other religions, if you know what I mean. Uh,
Mm,
the trigger was kind of the Catholic Church and the abuse that they had and the control that they had over Quebec. But really, the other religions were even more scary for the average Quebecer that was not exposed to them before, and because of propaganda, things that you hear, and eventually the rise of social media and some theories about the big replacement and what have you, that took a hold in some parts of Quebec.
right. Interesting.
Yeah.
So you've called Ligo a compelling figure before. Can you explain that a little bit, particularly for those we are east to west, for those of us who may not know as well why that might be the characterization?
Um, well, it's funny because Francois Legault was never seen as a charismatic figure, really. And it took time for Quebecers to get to know and like him. But eventually, people decided that they had enough of the same old from the Liberals, and the PQ chose a series of bad leaders, people that were like Karl Belanger, that was also a businessman but had no sense of how to do politics, and they drove that party to the ground. And so Legault kind of benefited of this fatigue towards these old parties to slip in between. But it was not because of his charisma or strength of leadership. That said, during his first mandate, something happened. COVID-19 hit, the pandemic hit, and Francois Legault became, to a lot of people's surprise, the most beloved premier in the entire country. His approval ratings were over 95%. Like those
More
are
than John Horgan, really?
Oh yeah, he was higher than Horgan. It was like Soviet style numbers. It was crazy. And it was all based on the way he was communicating daily with Quebecers, and he was responding and trying to show empathy to those that were suffering from this, even though he was moving forward with some of the stricter measures of confinement that we've seen in the country. So he was much beloved, but at the same time, it also kind of created the conditions for his demise eventually. Because when you go that high, there's only one way, and it's down.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So let's dig into that. So 2018, they get through the 2012, their third party. 2014, there's been a minority. 2014 goes back to the Liberals. Marois minority, PQ minority is gone. 2018, CAQ wins. The big COVID bounce. But we all know now that was not going to last. Could you say that there were visible cracks that existed in that before they kind of plunged through the ice? Was this in a way, a bit predictable, or was this very much a surprise that things went awry very suddenly and was not foreseeable? How did you see this emerging?
Well, the funny thing is, the CAQ emerging was a bit of a surprise because its predecessor never successfully formed government. But the PQ had a very, in 2018, they had a very, I will say, opinionated leader in Jean-François Lisée. And Lisée was a pretty radical separatist. And Philippe Couillard was leading a very tired liberal government. So Legault won kind of by default. Like, people didn't like the options that were in front of them. And then he served the pandemic wave to a bigger majority in the subsequent election. But here's the thing that you need to understand about Quebec politics. And I guess it's true in most provinces, where we have a party system where usually there are two main parties. And then sometimes there's a third wheel, that climbs and goes down, but usually the system is made for two party. That's the British parliamentary system. And either you are a big party or you are also ran with a handful of seats. So what happened in Quebec is that from the Confederation till the 30s, it was like everywhere else, the Liberals and the Conservatives. Eventually, in the 30s, l'Union Nationale from Maurice Duplessis took over and dislodged the Conservative as the second party in Quebec. Then in the 70s, it was the Parti Québécois that came to rise, and they pushed away l'Union Nationale, and they became the second party. The Liberals were always there. So when the CAQ came around, they basically dislodged the PQ. But the problem is that they never were able to fully eradicate them. There was always some breathing room.
They came close, though, didn't they, Karl?
They got close. They got close, but
did they get them down to 2 seats?
They went down. The Parti Québécois went down to actually there was a 1 seat at some point after resignation, if I'm not mistaken. But 2 seats and then 4 seats, like not enough, right? And they were not really a factor in the National Assembly, but they were never wiped out. And the conditions were created for them to come back because of the failure of the CAQ to establish itself as the second party. Because even though they were government, their approach was always kind of the third way. But if you're the third way, it means that the first 2 ways are still there, and they never were able to replace the PQ, and that was their challenge. But that's why you saw the CAQ play the cards of secularism, of French identity. All these moves were to keep and attract PQ voters and to keep them with them. And the PQ, in response, kind of radicalized its language and its rhetoric and moved further and further um, uh, to the right in a way on these issues, to try to compete with the CAQ on these for these voters, and that's what you saw happening in the past few years. This competition, who was the most pure in terms of defending the French and defending Quebec values.
Mm-hmm. And
Yeah.
yeah, and if I can just add an extra here, Nikki, it seems as well that the PQ moved to the right economically, and then also moved to the right culturally. And so there was still was there still a vote that was economically on the left that really had no expression, or was kind of latent during this time?
Well, it's interesting because the rise of the CAQ on the right side of the spectrum came with the rise of Quebec Solidaire on the left side of the
Yes.
spectrum. And at some point, I mean, Quebec Solidaire's goal was also to replace the PQ as the separatist alternative, but also as the true social democrat alternative. And they were not pushing sovereignty the way the PQ was for a while. And they were on the rise, and they won seats in many regions in Quebec. They had seats in Sherbrooke, in Montreal, which is their main base, but also Quebec City, in the Abitibi, and they were sprinkled around Quebec, and they were growing. And it looked like you could have a full shift at the provincial level with the CAQ on one side and the Quebec Solidaire on the other side. But since they were not successful to get rid of the PQ, they both are suffering from the return of the PQist as an alternative government, and they are both right now in jeopardy for their very own existence.
Right.
So you get that the election. I mean, I worked in BC when we went from government to 2 seats, and I think, and that recovery process is as well over the years. So, but when the PQ comes powering back, and you sort of touched on where the political spectrum played into that, but there were any other moments or issues that emerged that you sort of point back to in that resurgence?
Well, in a way, the saying that the government defeat themselves is true, and the moment where things starting to go south for the CAQ is related to a very regional issue. It's what is known as le troisième lien, the third link in Quebec City, which is to build a new bridge between the South Shore and the old capital, and they flip-flopped like 2 or 3 times on this. They lost a by-election on this issue because they repealed a promise to build one. And then once they lost that by-election, they went back and said, "Oh, we'll do it. We heard you." And then they came with all kinds of plans and shenanigans, and they didn't know what they were doing on this file. And they were just upsetting a lot of people in the process. Those that were for and those that were against were both upset. And it created conditions for the PQ to capitalize on that in the Quebec City region. But also, and this is interesting, the rise of a new conservative party in Quebec,
Yes.
which, even though they've never won a seat, they were able to attack the CAQ from the right front side of
Right.
Interesting.
and the current leader, Eric Duham, who incidentally used to work for Stockwell Day on Parliament Hill,
Huh.
uh, he was a radio personality at the time, and he was a Legault enthusiast. He supported Legault,
Right.
but he eventually decided that Legault was not delivering the goods, and he was not conservative enough, and created a conservative party. And nowadays, they're basically splitting the right-wing vote between the CAQ
Right.
and the conservative, which allows the PQ to rise at the top as the number one option among francophone, and with 35% support, could very well form a majority, because
Oh.
when you have 2 right-wing parties at 15% each, that's easy to win a lot of seats. And meanwhile, you have the provincial Liberals, who are, they have their own struggle. But their vote is very small in the francophone ridings. They're below 10%. But that issue of that bridge in Quebec City was really the trigger that showed that this government had lost its way. It became a
Right.
strong symbol, and even though it's a Quebec City area issue, people from Montreal were like, "What are they doing? Building a new bridge over there? They already have two side by side. They don't need a
Right.
third bridge."
And
And so the people in Montreal looked at that in Montreal area. I was like, "That's not the right priority for this government."
Right.
And so people started to distance themselves, and slowly and surely, the CAC looked like a government that was in disarray, that didn't know what they were doing, and it
yeah,
started
yes,
to apply to a number of files where it felt to people that they were trying to govern by polling and
right,
make decisions
Uh,
where wind was going.
right.
And that
yeah.
creates conditions for a bunch of flip-flops, change of minds, trial balloons, back and forth, and that was not working out. And you saw the polls going down, and kind of some kind of panic setting in within their ranks.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Carl, thinking about this region, I've driven across the bridges from the south side into Quebec City on the north, and at rush hour it can be pretty busy, and it can be a little bit hairy, frankly, especially if it's winter, snowstorm, dark. I mean, I've done that too, and it's not a great ride. And I can imagine if you live in Lévis on the south, I can see the attraction. And am I right in saying that federally the Conservatives have territory down there? That was Maxime Bernier's area as well, south of Quebec City. So is that kind of where the Conservatives started to erode the CAQ from the
Oh,
right?
absolutely,
Okay,
absolutely. And to add to that, you have to understand that the current mayor of Lévis is Stephen Blaney, who was a
okay,
Harper minister.
all right,
So there's a lot of support for conservative ideas in the
yes,
region, and the fact
Mm.
that the CAC gave up on that promise, then tried to bring it back to life, it created conditions for the conservative to chip away at that. And meanwhile, the PQ was basically always raising the stakes on secularism, identity, and the fact that they were not the corrupt liberals to
right,
become the alternative for government. So this is where the race is shaping right now, is that you have basically a PQ that could form a majority with 35%, and then you have the right wing vote split between the Conservatives and the CAC, and the Liberals who are hoping to make a comeback with yet another leader, because they too lost their leaders last December, when Pablo Rodriguez had to resign because of some fling flang, as they called it,
fling fling.
related to fundraising.
Yeah. All right. So this has been a government on the ropes. I mean, I was looking at the polls, Carl, and right after the
Yeah,
2022 election, you could see the dive, and it was pretty swift and pretty crushing. And we saw, I think was it Polera? Just a few days before Legault announced his resignation, came out and said that I think they were 11% and headed for 0 seats. So complete devastation. So this has been a
yeah.
government on the ropes for a while. There have been a few attempts at a reset, though. Um, Not successful, but what did they try?
Well, last fall, actually last summer, the CAC lost another by-election in Arthabasca, which is in the kind of the Victoriaville area, center of Quebec, and it used to be very strong CAC territory. In fact, they won that riding with 68% a couple of elections ago,
Mm.
and in that by-election in August, they finished with 7%.
Oof.
So that's a riding that they held ever since the party was created, and they held and they built and they went up all the way to 68%. To fall down to 7 was a clear signal that things were not going well, and then you need to recover and do something dramatic. So Legault decided to go all in. He went all in with a war on the unions.
Right.
Tabling laws that would really impact the way unions operate and can get contributions from their members. They went at war with doctors. went at war. Doctors with tabling a bill imposing huge fines if doctors were either retiring or moving or refusing to do the work that was assigned to them, which led to an exodus of doctors. Like around 100 left the province in the fall, and and on average you have between 1,000 and 1,200 patients. Now all these people have no family doctors anymore, and I'm not even talking about the 1.2 million Quebecers that don't have a family doctors to start.
Yeah.
Right? So he was going to war because we had to fix the system, and he was going like very hard. And then he was doubling down on identity, on secularism, and using the notwithstanding clause regularly to prevent
all the grenades, throw them at once.
Yeah. Exactly. So he was all in. I'm doing everything I can to reverse course and reverse the trend. And it backfired.
Yeah.
It went the wrong way. The free fall accelerated. So that's why Legault decided to call it quit, is because he played all his cards. He played everything the way his program said he should have the way the program was outlining them back in the days, and he went as far as he could, and really creating what he called himself a revolution. But the consequences and the collateral damage was the CAQ's support went even lower. And to the point you mentioned, Polara, 11% in fifth place for a sitting government, unheard of, right? And so he had no choice but to go, and probably should have gone last summer when he first realized that he had to do something to recover the government. Well, he chose to go with this very radical right-wing agenda, trampling on Quebec's rights, using the notwithstanding clause. One of the bill was preventing any organization receiving public money from suing the government based on the Quebec values that they decided was important. And they also tabled the Constitution of Quebec, which nobody was asking for, and they did not really consult anyone but their own to table it. And that Constitution was again stifling the dissent. So that's a very dogmatic, very anti-dissent kind of. I don't want to say authoritarian, that would be too strong, but certainly tendencies that were not very democratic in its essence.
Okay, so we have Legault's one for the history books now, but does he leave any sort of legacy or ideological pattern that next leaders can draw on, or has he done so much damage here? Do you really think the future looks like?
Well, the one thing that, I mean, yes, there's some shift that have happened in Quebec politics because of François Legault that will remain. The way the Parti Québécois has shifted, has hardened its rhetoric on immigration, for instance. That's because of Legault being able to successfully harvest voters on those issues. That's here to stay, even if Legault goes, even if the CAQ disappears. That shift to the right is here to stay. I don't know if his party will survive. As I said earlier, the tradition is for a party to make it big, you have to kill off another party. They did not succeed to do that. The pattern in Quebec is not the Mark Carney pattern, a savior coming in and saving a party from disaster. I mean, it's always possible. We've seen weird things in politics in the past 2 decades, but it's going to be really hard for somebody, especially considering the potential candidates that are being named right now. Nobody's coming through as a potential savior. And also, contrary to the federal Liberals, the CAQ is at 11% in fifth place, not not in second place with 20%. And also the CAQ is a new party. It's not deep roots like the federal Liberals. So the comparison doesn't hold. And in recent history in Quebec, when a regime that was going down, that was coming to its end, decided to switch leaders to bring a new premier to try to change things, well, incidentally, it happened with two brothers. Pierre-Marc Johnson became PQ premier, and he lasted a few months, and then he went down to defeat. And then Daniel Johnson replaced Robert Bourassa as Liberal leader, and he also stayed around for a few months as premier, then went down to defeat. He ended up leading the no camp during the referendum in '95, but he never formed government again. So those are the examples. You become premier, you manage it, and then usually you don't recover. But the policies of the CAQ, the way secularism has moved forward, it's going to be very difficult to reverse that. I think Quebecers have accepted that, and the fact that they use the notwithstanding clause, of course, makes it very difficult for any court to strike that. So politically, it's not going to be easy to reverse course on that, and that's going to be his legacy. On the economic front, however, and on the healthcare front, the damages that are here, especially on healthcare, the last few months have been horrible. I don't know what's going to happen next, but frankly, you cannot just create doctors. It takes a long time. And all these people that have left because of his approach, they're not coming back.
Yeah, and other provinces want them. So you're
Doug
not
Ford
going to
at
get
the
them
press
back,
conference.
right?
Doug Ford at the press conference, and he told Quebec doctors, "Call me 1-800-Doug Ford," and they did.
Just send me a text.
Team Canada wins again. I see.
Yeah,
Wonderful.
Yeah.
Well, Karl, thanks so much for joining us. That's a lot of insight, and we got elections in October, right, this year?
Elections in October. The next premier will be chosen on April 12th.
Yes.
There was a lot of ministers on the starting line, but they've all dropped off right now. It looks like there's going to be a two-way race, maybe a three-way race, and none of them are outsiders. They're all from within the cabinet right now.
Right.
Interesting. Well, hopefully we can bring you back on again to talk about how all of this progresses as you get close to election time. And thanks for this. I appreciate your. I never can not be in awe of your memory of all of the history in politics, knowing you so long. So we really appreciate it, and this has been really helpful.
Well, thanks for having me.
So that was a really insightful conversation, and I think we're leaving it thinking it's hard to imagine here that Quebecers aren't going to vote for a new government this fall. Doug, I think you've got a couple slides here we're going to put up from the Palace poll that was released a few days before Legault announced his resignation, and we're going to dig into them a little bit.
Yeah, let's just take a look at this. I mean, this is pretty, as Karl was talking about. I mean, this is stunning stuff. The majority government, they won a majority in 2018, a bigger majority in 2022, and here they are tracking down in close to the single digits, likely to be completely wiped out, not win a seat. But no, clear, not a really clear alternative. PQ obviously ahead. The Liberals, they have some votes here, but as Karl mentioned, heavily concentrated at Anglo-Montreal, so it's a very inefficient vote, and not it turns up as votes in that part of the island, but doesn't do so well after. Quebec Solidaire kind of fades in this context. So we'll see how this thing goes over the next 8 months, I guess, till the election. Nikki, let's just take a look at this other one here. This is on the issue of how people in their support, partisan support, look at the issue of sovereignty referendum, and we'll see that while the PQs Karl's talking about, might become the government on a fairly weak vote, they may still become a majority government. There we go. And you can see in the poll here that their base is very strongly in favor of a referendum. And nobody else, none of the other parties are in Quebec, including Quebec Solidaire, are particularly enthused about having another referendum on sovereignty. So that in a way, it's a weakness for the PQ, but also it's just a reality that they have a very motivated base that is going to drive this thing. And so all of us as Canadians are going to have this feature of our politics in 2026 in Alberta, and by fall it's going to be in Quebec as well, where we're talking about unbundling this country.
Yeah, and I think also just we're seeing in other provinces too the polarization, right? Whether it's on an issue like separatism or we're seeing a lot around reconciliation. I think we're going to see elections that are the ballot box questions are changing from where parties were at last cycle in many provinces.
Well, we'll tune in with Karl as things get closer and see what his read are. I don't. I think
That's
it'll be
early.
a fascinating one. So I
Too
hope.
early to project
Yeah, and
yet.
I think we all got a stake in this one as well. So that's why I really
Yep.
wanted to hear what Karl's thoughts were.
Before we wrap up, we're at the part that we call Love It or Heave It, about something that each of us loves and wants to keep, or something we'd like to heave and forever forget. What do you have this week, Tom?
Well, I am loving the Melania movie. Okay. Have you seen it yet, Nikki?
I think my husband was threatening me that we would go sit alone in a theater and watch it.
Exactly. Well, nobody else has seen it either, and that is exactly the part I am loving. Like Canadians, you can go on your Odeon ticket, the app and look at the empty seats for all of the opening shows last Friday. It was magnificent. It opened to empty theaters across North America on Friday, and Amazon Studios, Jeff Bezos' company, paid $35 million to make it, and another $40 million in rights. $28 million went into Melania's pocket, apparently. I'm not loving that. But I am loving that this movie has given Canadians another way to show Bezos and Trump, like, we don't like you, and we have ways of boycotting you. And they showed it in spades
Yeah.
on the weekend. And it's like all the money in the world, guys. We still don't like you.
Yep.
You can put on your phony military parade, Donald Trump. Nobody's coming. That's what I'm loving. So, what about you, Nikki? What are you loving? What are you heaving?
Well, last week I heaved Hootsuite's ICE contract, so I wanted to give some
Yeah.
love to some
All
things.
right.
I think it's really important right now in the world and in the space that we're at to look at some of the positives. It's hard to really find positives, I think, and when we're looking at Minnesota, looking at our neighbors below the border and what they're facing right now, and especially how that aftermath has been of Alex Purdy and his murder that we all witnessed online, and we can't look away. But the other thing I think that is really important that we are not looking away from as well, and I certainly think, to their credit, Canadian media has been covering this a fair bit for us all in the past week or so too, is just the outpouring of response from Minnesotans and people from other states heading there to help their neighbors. I was watching news the other night with people standing outside ICE detention centers and waiting for people who had been detained to come out and giving them food and rides and that care. I have family in Minnesota. I have a cousin there who's a nurse, and so my heart's very much there as well into what they're facing in their communities. But I think, being able to really hold on to the fact that they are showing us, I think, the best of humanity. They're standing together. They are protesting. They are singing and gathering in churches. They're feeding each other. They're caring for each other. And, in the case of Alex Purdy, standing between people who are trying to hurt them together. That is something I think we have to give sort of all the love in the world to right now, is the best in humanity. Well, I think Donald Trump is certainly trying to bring out the worst in us.
Yes. Okay. Love beats hate, says Nikki.
Every time.
Very good. All right. Well, there you have it for today. Love beats hate from Nikki. We'll be back next week with more Nikki wisdom moments and more left east to west. Thank you.
Thanks for joining Left East to West with hosts Nikki Hill and Tom Parkin. We'd love to hear your comments, ratings, follows, and shares. It helps people find us. To become a Left East to West community member and to help us reach even more Canadians, subscribe using the link in the show notes. You can watch us on YouTube or listen wherever you get your favorite podcasts. Just search for Left East to West and subscribe. I'm Doug Hamilton signing off for Left East to West. We'll see you next week.